Dr. Eliza Gray stood at the observation window, her eyes glued to the digital readout on the console in front of her. The numbers were fluctuating wildly, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She had seen this before. The propulsion system they were testing for Mars missions had been struggling to produce the desired results for months, and today, like every other day, seemed like another failure. "Dr. Gray, we've got a small anomaly in the data," said Jason, one of the junior engineers, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Eliza's fingers hovered over the controls. "What do you mean by anomaly?" she asked, scanning the display. A faint blip appeared on the screen, a seemingly insignificant deviation. It wasn't unusual for small fluctuations to occur during such high-stakes experiments, but something about it caught her eye. "It's just a slight deviation in the probe's trajectory," Jason continued. "But it's a bit too much of a deviation." Eliza squinted at the numbers. What kind of deviation? The probe, launched hours earlier, had been intended to travel a simple trajectory around Earth's orbit, a straightforward test run for the propulsion system. But this anomaly suggested it had deviated far beyond expected limits. The trajectory was wrong, the timing was off. And yet, the system seemed to be working perfectly. "Let's check the telemetry," Eliza muttered, now thoroughly intrigued. She toggled the console to access the probe's latest data. It showed the probe was no longer in Earth's orbit, but traveling out toward the asteroid belt, far beyond its intended path. But what was most perplexing was the timestamp. The probe had only been in motion for a fraction of the time it should have taken to reach that distance. "Impossible," Eliza whispered. "It should have taken days for the probe to travel that far, not hours." Jason looked up from his screen. "Are we sure the readings are right? Maybe there's a glitch. I'm not sure. But this is far beyond the expected speed. Far beyond anything we've tested," Eliza said, her pulse quickening. She glanced around the control room. No one else seemed to have noticed the anomaly yet, distracted by their own work. But Eliza knew something was wrong. Deep down, she felt it. A creeping, undeniable sense that something huge had just happened, something no one had been prepared for. Jason was already pulling up more data, but Eliza wasn't waiting. "Track the probe," she ordered. "I want to see its exact location." The screen blinked momentarily and then locked onto a set of coordinates. Eliza's heart skipped a beat when the numbers appeared. Alpha Centauri. Impossible. There was no way the probe could have traveled that far. Her hands trembled slightly as she brought up a map of the star system. The probe had left the solar system entirely, in a fraction of the time it should have taken. The propulsion system, it seemed, had accidentally achieved something that had never been imagined in human history. Faster than light travel. Her mind raced. What did this mean? She stared at the screen, unable to tear her gaze away. They'd accidentally broken the speed barrier, but no one had even noticed. No one had even realized they'd unlocked FTL technology until now. The implications were staggering, far beyond anything Eliza had ever dreamed of. But there was no time to dwell on it. She had to keep this quiet, at least for now. There was too much at stake. Too much potential for disaster if the wrong people learned about this. But what could she do with this knowledge? How could they control something so dangerous? "Jason," she said, her voice firm now, "tell the team to hold everything. We're not releasing this data to anyone yet." He blinked in confusion. "But the tests." "Shut it down, Jason. We need to think. We've just discovered something no one in the world is ready for." The control room fell into a tense silence as Eliza's mind raced with possibilities, and the weight of her discovery settled like a stone in her stomach. Earth had just crossed a line, whether they knew it or not. And it might already be too late to turn back. "Let me know if you need any further adjustments or additions." Eliza couldn't sleep. The quiet hum of the lab, the soft glow of the monitors, all seemed eerily distant now. The events of the past 24 hours kept swirling in her mind. What she had seen on the screen, that blip, that anomaly, wasn't just an accident. It was something more. They had stumbled onto something that no one could have predicted. She glanced at her watch. 2:15 a.m. Her thoughts were racing too fast for sleep. The team was likely asleep too, but Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that she had to act. That was when she decided. The experiment couldn't end here. They needed to verify what had happened, but this time, it had to be controlled. They couldn't afford another mistake. She made her decision quickly, typing a message to Jason and the rest of the team. Asterisk, we need to rerun the test. But this time, it's no longer a test. This is real. Meet me in the control room, asterisk. By the time they gathered in the lab, it was already morning. The fatigue on their faces was palpable, but Eliza could see the curiosity in their eyes. They all wanted answers. Eliza, Jason said, his voice hesitant, are you sure this is the right move? We don't even fully understand what happened yet. I know, she replied, pacing the room. But we need to understand. We can't just let this slip away. I'm not sure what we've discovered yet, but the data doesn't lie. We've achieved FTL travel. We just don't know how or why. The team exchanged glances, clearly concerned. But they had no other choice. The potential to revolutionize space travel, or, as Eliza feared, to bring about something more dangerous, was too vast to ignore. The plan was simple. They would repeat the test with a larger object, a spacecraft that would carry a live crew. They had to be certain that what they had seen before wasn't a fluke. This time, it would take a much greater risk. I'll volunteer, Eliza said, raising her hand. I'll lead the mission. Her decision wasn't impulsive. She felt a deep responsibility to understand what they had unlocked, and who better to make the jump than the person who had been at the heart of the discovery. Jason gave her a worried look. Eliza, this is uncharted territory. The risk. I know the risks, she interrupted, her tone sharp. But if we don't explore this now, someone else will. And we may not be ready for what they'll do with it. With a reluctant nod, the team began preparations. The spacecraft was already outfitted with the latest propulsion systems, but Eliza wanted to ensure the FTL mechanism was active and stable. They worked through the night, making the necessary adjustments, double-checking every circuit, and running simulations. It was only after the sun had set again that they were ready. We're cleared for launch, Eliza said, standing at the front of the control room. I'll be the one to fly the ship. Jason gave her a long look. You understand, this could change everything. I understand, she replied. But the world needs to know. We need to know. The countdown began. With every passing second, Eliza's heart beat faster, knowing that this moment could alter the course of human history forever. The ship stood ready, its engines humming softly, its crew waiting for the go-ahead. It wasn't just about a test anymore. It was about discovering how far this new technology could take them, and what consequences it might bring. As the final seconds ticked away, Eliza took a deep breath. She had always dreamed of reaching the stars. But now, as she prepared to make history, she realized the stars might be reaching back, and they might not be as welcoming as humanity hoped. The spacecraft's engines hummed with quiet power as Eliza strapped herself into the pilot's seat, her fingers hovering over the controls. The mission felt heavier than any she'd ever led before. This wasn't just a test. It was the moment when humanity would cross the threshold into the unknown, and Eliza was the one steering them toward that unknown. The small crew of astronauts, experts in their fields but now united in the uncertainty of what they were about to do, sat in silence. The control room back at the station was eerily quiet, too. Eliza could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. Everyone knew this was a gamble. No one really knew what would happen when they pushed the ship beyond its known limits. Everything looks good, Eliza. Jason's voice came through the comms, offering a thin thread of reassurance. The FTL system is calibrated and stable. Just follow the sequence, and we should be fine. She nodded, though her nerves were like fireflies flickering in her stomach. FTL travel, something that had been nothing more than a science fiction dream just a week ago, was now a reality. But the test they were about to conduct wasn't a simple trial run. If it worked, they would be the first humans to travel faster than light. If it didn't, well, no one really knew what the consequences could be. Eliza checked her instruments again, taking a deep breath. "All right, let's do this," she muttered under her breath. With a few swift commands, she initiated the sequence to activate the FTL drive. The ship shuddered slightly, the hum of the engines growing louder as they powered up. Eliza felt her pulse quicken as the screen in front of her flickered, displaying coordinates and data that seemed impossible. Alpha Centauri, the closest star system to Earth, was now within their reach, not in years, but in mere hours. A rush of adrenaline surged through her, but it was quickly replaced by something deeper, something almost primal, a sense of awe mixed with fear. "Ready?" Jason's voice crackled through the comms once again. "Ready," Eliza replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was ready for. She pushed the throttle forward, and the ship surged ahead, its FTL drive humming louder, vibrating through the entire vessel. For a brief moment, everything felt normal. And then, everything changed. The stars outside the viewport began to stretch, elongating into brilliant, blinding lines of light. The ship lurched, and for a moment, Eliza felt the sensation of floating, as if gravity itself had momentarily ceased to exist. Time seemed to bend, distort, and then, without warning, the stretching stars snapped back into place. In a heartbeat, the ship was there. The vast expanse of space had been crossed. Eliza checked the readout. Alpha Centauri. They had arrived. In hours. Not even a full day had passed since they'd left Earth's orbit. The crew was silent, processing what had just happened. Eliza's hands gripped the controls, her mind racing. There was no way this could be right. No way the ship could have covered this distance so quickly. And yet the evidence was undeniable. They had made it. "Jason," she said, her voice steady but incredulous. "We're here. We've actually done it." The silence on the other end of the comms was deafening. Then Jason's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "Impossible. You've got to be kidding me." But it wasn't a joke. The ship was in orbit around Alpha Centauri, and they had made history in the span of just a few hours. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of what had just happened hung heavily in the air. But there was no time to process it. Eliza knew they couldn't stay in orbit forever, that they needed to return, but something in her gut told her they hadn't yet fully understood the power of what they had just unleashed. As amazing as it was, this breakthrough could be dangerous, more dangerous than anyone realized. And it was already too late to turn back. Back on Earth, the news was starting to spread, but not in the way Eliza had expected. The public wasn't aware of the true nature of the mission yet. The official story, for now, was that the mission had been an experimental success, a huge achievement in space exploration, but nothing that would threaten the status quo. The FTL breakthrough remained a closely guarded secret, known only to the top officials in the space agency and a few select scientists. But that didn't stop the rumors from circulating. It began with whispers, strange sightings of unusual lights streaking across the sky. At first, they were dismissed as meteor showers or military test flights, but the stories didn't stop. People started recording videos of fast-moving objects darting across the night sky, moving faster than anything human technology should be able to produce. Some swore they saw ships vanishing and reappearing, as if bending the very fabric of space itself. It wasn't long before these rumors found their way into the mainstream. News outlets picked up on the stories, and social media erupted with theories. The hashtag FTL phenomenon trended for days. Experts dismissed the idea as fanciful, but there was an undercurrent of unease that couldn't be ignored. People were starting to wonder, was there something going on that they weren't being told? Eliza had been following the media reports from the station, unable to escape the unsettling feeling gnawing at her. Her team had returned from Alpha Centauri, and the data had been locked away in secure servers, but the question of what to do with the information lingered in her mind. She had seen firsthand what FTL travel could do, what it could mean, but she also knew that the world wasn't ready for this knowledge. The more Eliza thought about it, the more certain she became that the world couldn't remain in the dark forever. No matter how carefully they hid the data, someone would eventually uncover the truth. The signs were everywhere, and it was only a matter of time before the wrong people took notice. "Do you think they'll figure it out?" Jason's voice broke through her thoughts. He had been unusually quiet since their return, and now he sat across from her in the lab, looking over the latest media reports on his tablet. "I think it's only a matter of time," Eliza said, her fingers lightly tapping the table in front of her. "There are too many strange occurrences now. People are asking questions that can't be answered with conventional science. The FTL phenomenon isn't a fluke. It's real." Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat. And what if someone else figures it out? What if someone else builds on it before we do? Eliza's heart skipped a beat. That was the fear she hadn't voiced yet, the fear that they weren't the only ones experimenting with FTL technology. The world's superpowers, particularly the military, had already shown interest in the technology. The fact that they hadn't been told anything only deepened her concern. "I don't know," she admitted, "but what I do know is that we've opened a door that can't be closed, and we're not the only ones watching." As the days went by, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The signs were there, and the world was starting to notice. The question wasn't whether Earth had FTL technology. It was whether humanity could handle it. And more importantly, whether anyone would be able to stop what was already set in motion. It wasn't long before the situation began to spiral beyond anyone's control. What had started as a secret breakthrough in a quiet laboratory was now a global crisis. The rumors had spread far and wide, fueling speculation that someone, somewhere, had developed faster than light technology. The signs were everywhere now. Sudden bursts of light streaking across the sky. Strange occurrences of ships disappearing and reappearing at impossible speeds, and a growing number of unexplainable phenomena in space. The media was in overdrive. News outlets speculated wildly about the source of these sightings, some even entertaining the idea of extraterrestrial involvement. But it wasn't aliens. It was humanity. And more specifically, the small group of scientists working under Eliza's supervision, who had inadvertently unleashed a power that no one was prepared for. Meanwhile, on Earth, the power struggle had begun. Nations that had once been cautious in their military advancements were now desperate to obtain FTL technology, seeing it as the key to unimaginable power. The United States, Russia, China, and several other countries had all but declared a silent arms race, each country secretly attempting to reverse engineer the data they knew had to exist somewhere. The implications were clear. Whoever controlled FTL technology would control the future of the planet. Eliza watched the rapid escalation from a distance, her hands tied. The data, the breakthrough, everything they had worked on, was locked away in secured servers. But despite their best efforts, the world's most powerful governments were pushing for access, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they would demand it. The question wasn't whether they could keep it hidden. It was how long they could keep it hidden before someone with the right resources uncovered the truth. "We can't keep this under wraps forever," Jason said, his voice tinged with frustration as he paced the room. "The world is changing, Eliza. People are going to want answers, and they're not going to stop until they get them." Eliza nodded grimly. "I know. I've been thinking about that. But we can't let them just take it. If the wrong people get their hands on this, it's not just the balance of power that's at risk. It's everything. We have no idea what this technology can do when it's fully unleashed. It could be catastrophic." Jason rubbed his face. "But what if we're too late? What if someone already has it?" Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. There were whispers in the corridors of government offices, rumors of military projects that had already begun experimenting with FTL technology. It was clear that someone somewhere had either discovered it on their own or was rapidly working to replicate the breakthrough. The ticking clock was deafening. "I don't know," Eliza said, her voice low. "But if we don't act now, it will be out of our hands. The world's about to change whether we like it or not. We need to make a decision. Do we control this, or do we let the world tear itself apart over it?" Outside, the world continued to move forward, unaware of the dark forces gathering behind the scenes. Tensions were escalating between world powers. The more Eliza thought about it, the more certain she became that the world would never be the same again. The technology they had discovered, the breakthrough they had made, it was too powerful to be left unchecked. And soon, the question wouldn't be whether FTL technology could be controlled. It would be whether humanity itself was ready for it. As the days wore on, the pressure mounted. Eliza couldn't escape the constant feeling that everything was slipping through her fingers. The world was changing, unfolding in ways she could hardly comprehend. And it wasn't just about space exploration anymore. This was no longer a matter of human curiosity or scientific discovery. It was about control. Control of the future, of destiny, and of the technology that could reshape everything. Whoever held the keys to FTL travel would hold the world's power. In the months since the breakthrough, tensions had been quietly escalating behind closed doors. Governments had begun to push harder, making direct inquiries about the FTL technology. Some had even sent emissaries to Eliza's team, making thinly veiled threats about access to the data. Eliza had turned them away, each one more insistent than the last. The military, in particular, seemed relentless, and their requests were becoming demands. But there was something even more unnerving. There were whispers, deep within the intelligence community, that the U.S. had made a move. An unknown faction, operating in the shadows, had already secured a portion of the FTL data, piecing it together in secret. It made sense. There was no way they could stay on the sidelines with so much at stake. The U.S. had always been a step ahead in military technology, but FTL was a game changer, a weapon that could tip the balance of global power in an instant. "What are we doing, Eliza?" Jason asked, his voice strained with frustration. They had just finished a meeting with a high-ranking official from a Western nation, and Jason seemed visibly shaken. The official had hinted that their government had already gotten their hands on part of the data. If they have it. If anyone else has it. "I know," Eliza replied quietly. "I've been hearing the same rumors. We can't trust anyone anymore. It's not just about making the right decision anymore. It's about survival." The room was heavy with uncertainty. Eliza had always believed in transparency, in the idea that knowledge should be shared for the greater good of humanity. But the moment they had unlocked the FTL secret, that ideal had crumbled. There was no longer any room for ideals in this new world. This was a race. And it wasn't just about reaching the stars. It was about who controlled the stars. "Do we have a choice?" Jason pressed. "If the U.S. or China or anyone else, if they have the technology, what's stopping them from using it to dominate the rest of the world?" Eliza's mind raced. The implications were too vast to ignore. With FTL, anyone could reach any point in the galaxy in an instant, making military dominance virtually unstoppable. The ability to strike anywhere, anytime, without warning, without retaliation. It was a weapon unlike anything humanity had ever known. "We can't let that happen," Eliza said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "If they're already working on it, then we need to beat them to it. We have to make sure this doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Jason nodded slowly, a mixture of fear and determination in his eyes. "What's our next step?" Eliza took a deep breath. She had been thinking about this for days, trying to find a solution that wouldn't tear the world apart. But now, there was only one thing they could do: move fast before it was too late. "We need to make sure we control the narrative," she said firmly. "We have to release the data, but on our terms. We need to bring the world into the fold before the military-industrial complex takes over." Her voice softened, but the weight of her decision hung heavily between them. It's the only way to prevent a disaster. The world was teetering on the edge of chaos. What had begun as a groundbreaking scientific achievement had quickly morphed into a high-stakes geopolitical crisis. The FTL technology was no longer just a marvel. It was the most coveted prize on the planet. Eliza knew that she couldn't hold on to it much longer, but releasing it to the world now, under these circumstances, felt like a gamble with fate. In the weeks following their decision to control the narrative, Eliza and her team had worked tirelessly to prepare a public release. The data was meticulously packaged, not just in scientific terms, but in a way that the public, world leaders, ordinary citizens, and the media could understand. They needed the world to see the power of FTL travel, but they also needed to show the potential dangers it held. But the moment the first press release went live, it was clear that the world wasn't ready. The initial reaction was a mix of awe and terror. Governments scrambled to respond, trying to control the flood of information. Stock markets plummeted. International relations began to fracture as nations quickly realized that whoever controlled FTL technology would be able to reshape the global order in their favor. Within hours, world leaders were making statements, some demanding that the technology be shared equally, while others declared that it was a matter of national security. It was the beginning of a new Cold War, one where information and access to technology would become the new weapons of mass destruction. Eliza watched the reports from her lab, her heart sinking with every passing hour. The ideal of transparency was slipping away, replaced by the harsh realities of global power struggles. No one seemed to care about the ethics of the discovery anymore. They cared only about the power it promised. In the midst of this turmoil, something darker had begun to emerge. A shadowy faction, operating outside the reach of traditional governments, had started to move. Eliza had received an encrypted message, its contents brief but unmistakable. Asterisk, we know what you have. If you want to protect it, come to us. Trust no one. Asterisk, it was signed simply. Asterisk, the Vanguard, asterisk. Jason was the first to react. Do you think it's a hoax? He asked, leaning over the encrypted tablet Eliza had just unlocked. I don't know, Eliza replied, her voice steady, though inside she felt a growing sense of dread. But whoever they are, they know more than they should. The timing's too perfect. Someone's watching us. Someone knows what we've done. The next few days were a blur. The media buzzed with increasing hostility. Speculation ran rampant about the Vanguard, and soon rumors of other rogue factions with access to FTL technology began to surface. It became clear that no one could be trusted, not even the governments they had once believed they could count on. In her gut, Eliza could feel it. The world had changed irreparably. And now, they were no longer in control. The tipping point had passed, and the race for FTL dominance had begun. An uncontrollable force that would lead to unpredictable consequences. The Vanguard's offer had been simple. Join them, and together they could ensure that FTL technology was protected from those who would misuse it. It was an invitation to a new kind of power, a shadowy alliance that promised security, but at a cost Eliza wasn't sure she was willing to pay. The world was fracturing, and Eliza had to decide. Stand her ground and fight for the future of humanity, or give in to the pressures of power and risk becoming part of the very system she had once sought to change. The choice, she knew, would define everything. The world had descended into chaos, and Eliza knew that the moment of truth had arrived. The Vanguard's message, its offer of an alliance, had become more than just a choice. It was a ticking clock, a final test of everything she believed in. Could she trust them? Could she afford not to? The fractured world outside her lab was a mirror of her inner turmoil. Governments were scrambling to secure FTL technology for themselves, and rogue factions were emerging, each claiming they could protect humanity from the devastating consequences of such power. There were protests in the streets, cries of panic from civilians who feared what might come next. Some wondered if they would survive the storm. Eliza had always been a scientist first, an explorer of the unknown, someone who believed that knowledge should be shared for the betterment of all. But now, faced with the overwhelming force of global politics and the dangerous promises of organizations like the Vanguard, she found herself questioning everything. What if sharing the technology wasn't the answer? What if the world wasn't ready for it? Or worse, what if the wrong hands had already taken hold of it? Jason was no longer the calm voice of reason. He, too, was feeling the strain. Eliza, we've tried to control this, but it's out of our hands now. We can't keep pretending we can fix this. The Vanguard knows what they're doing. They have the resources, the power. They're offering us a way out. I know, Eliza said softly, her eyes fixed on the screen in front of her. The latest updates flooded in from every corner of the globe. Nations were positioning their military forces, each trying to claim dominion over FTL technology. A new arms race was underway, one where the prize wasn't just weapons, but the ability to control the very fabric of space and time itself. She clenched her fists. But is that what we've come to? Selling out to the highest bidder? We can't just let FTL be used as a tool for power and control. It was meant for something more. It was meant to unite us, to explore the stars, not to be weaponized. Jason's gaze softened. And if we don't act, what happens then? Do we just let the world tear itself apart? For the first time, Eliza felt the crushing weight of the choice ahead of her. She knew that no matter what she decided, there would be consequences. The truth was, there were no easy answers. She had spent her life dreaming of the stars, but now the stars themselves seemed out of reach, too dangerous, too volatile. The encrypted message from the Vanguard lingered in her mind. They had promised protection, control, and stability. But at what cost? Was joining them the only way to ensure that FTL technology didn't fall into the wrong hands? Or would they become just another shadowy group, wielding power for their own ends? Eliza took a deep breath and made her decision. It wasn't the path of least resistance, but it was the one she believed in. She couldn't sacrifice her ideals, not now. The world was fractured, yes, but there was still hope. She believed in the goodness of humanity, in the possibility of unity, even in the face of fear. We're not joining the Vanguard, Eliza said, her voice resolute. But we're not backing down either. We're going to release everything. All of it. And we'll take the consequences. If we don't, we'll never have the chance to make things right. Jason met her gaze, a mix of relief and determination in his eyes. Then let's make sure the world hears us. Let's make sure they understand. And so, with one final push, they released the full data, the truth about FTL travel, the potential dangers, and the promise of a future shaped by exploration, not exploitation. Eliza knew there would be no turning back. The world would change, for better or worse, because of what they had done. But it was out of their hands now. The fate of humanity was no longer in their control. It was in the hands of the people.